Hello, and welcome to Research Chatter, a podcast sponsored by the Strategic Management Society, SMS. I'm your co-host, Ronnie Chatterji from Duke University in North Carolina, and I'm joined by Charlie Williams from Bocconi University in Milan, Italy. This is our first edition of Research Chatter, and the purpose of this series is to highlight big ideas from business school professors from around the world. Our sponsor, SMS, is always searching for new ways to connect scholarship to practice, and this podcast is just one experiment in doing so. In each episode, we'll focus on one topic where business school researchers are uncovering new insights about real-world problems. Our goal is to speed up the translation process from ideas to action. I want to bring in Charlie. So Charlie, why is this still so hard? We've been trying to translate our research, it seems like forever. Why are we still unable to do this effectively?
Hi, Ronnie. It's great to be recording this after we've been batting around the idea of a podcast for a while now. As far as your question, I think there are lots of challenges to translating research into action, and I won't even go into them all now. But I'm excited about this podcast because I think it addresses an important one. A typical research paper tries to establish one narrow relationship as completely as possible. It's painstaking, difficult work to really nail down cause and effect in some narrow domain. But then it's also difficult to make the jump from this specific paper to valid generalities that'd be more useful to those outside academia. So you really need a broader set of papers on a single topic to draw reasonable and useful conclusions from. And for academics, this sifting, this sort of talking across many papers often happens in conversations informally in the hallway after a research seminar. It's where we tend to make connections across different research projects, talk about what we think is really going on underneath these different claims. For instance, one of my office neighbors here in Milan has an espresso machine in his office, quite Italian, and there are impromptu bull sessions in his doorway over coffee after most seminars. Though in this case, they are half in Italian, and I only catch about half of that. But that's the spirit I think we're trying to share with listeners through this research chatter.
Yeah, I think that this topic that we're going to talk about today, which is research and practice on business accelerators, is just a great example of what you're speaking about. You know, we often expect a lot from one paper. We want it to change our viewpoint or inform us about a new topic. But often it takes a bunch of papers on one topic to really figure out what's going on. And those take a long time to accumulate. And at the same time, the real world, as it were, is moving in light speed. So it's often hard for researchers to catch up to the real world and kind of have actionable insights at the same time. And by the time we figure something out, the real world has moved on. But I think in the case of business accelerators, and we're talking about organizations like Y Combinator, Techstars, Rock Health, Blueprint, and thousands of them around the world that you've never heard of, we're thinking of a phenomenon that's actually really hot right now in practice and in research. And that's why I'm really excited to make this our topic today. Charlie, what's an accelerator? Why do we need to do research on these things? What should our listeners know about them?
Yes, I agree, Ronnie. This is a really exciting area where what's happening in the world, that researchers have actually kind of jumped on that probably as soon as really possible, and are trying to understand what it means. The set of papers we'll be talking about today, a few of them do a very nice job of laying out what are the fundamental aspects that make accelerators different from the kinds of ways that cities and investors have supported entrepreneurship in the past. Some of the key distinctive aspects of them are a selection process. And for the top, there's two really granddaddies of this new form, which are Y Combinator and Techstars, who you mentioned, based in Silicon Valley and in Boulder, Colorado. Actually, Techstars has spread quite internationally, but they both have extremely selective process where right now I think they're reporting that one of them 3% acceptance rate, the other 1% acceptance rate for their various programs. So harder to get into than Harvard undergraduate, for instance. What then happens after you've been selected into the program, you receive an initial investment, and across these many different accelerators, that can vary from $15,000 up to $120,000 to get your venture just in this early seed phase going. And then you go on location with a cohort of other similar founding teams for an intensive training period, usually 3, possibly 4 months, where you work together to develop the idea, working with intensive mentorship, a lot of advice from the seed accelerator itself, and this all culminates in a demo day, a sort of launching of your product publicly to investors. Some of the attractions of this forum, well-known startups have come out of this. So Airbnb, Dropbox, Zenefits, there's a long list of companies we recognize that have already come out of this. Large total value. Just this month in June, CDB, Seed Database Online, which tracks about 234 seed accelerators around the world, marked that $10 billion total had been raised by these seed accelerators. Of that, I should mention, about half of that is Y Combinator. But it really highlights that the first of these accelerators started in 2005. That was Y Combinator. Techstars was soon after in 2007. We're now looking at 200 around the world, and that number is growing very rapidly. So as a form, it's influential, high profile, and being adopted rapidly around the world.
And what I think is so interesting about the accelerators and how they're different than incubators is that kind of cohort effect that you're talking about, and the idea that there's this demo day that culminates at the end. And so that makes it different than a lot of different ways we've thought to encourage entrepreneurship in the past. And so you come in with a class, you might work together, there might be spillover effects from your peers, and you have this kind of big event to work up to at the end, which is really convenient for all the investors who are going to attend. So I think we're seeing this across many different accelerators, the original granddaddies, as you spoke about them, and all the imitators that are adopting a lot of similar elements as you go forward, as this becomes kind of an organizational phenomenon. I think what's interesting here is, we also have a bunch of new papers coming out. And for me, when I picked up on this, it was remarkable that, academics, and maybe something's changing in the way we do research, or maybe this is this topic specifically. But we have a bunch of academics, people like Susan Cohen and Chris Bingham and Ben Holland, Cheryl Winston-Smith, Juanita Gonzalez-Uribe, Michael Leatherby, Sandy Yu, and a few others who are really picking up on this really quickly, collecting data from a wide variety of accelerators, trying to figure out the basic question, which is, do accelerators actually accelerate? Remember the big picture, right? We're setting these things up because we feel like entrepreneurship is important to the economy. Students are really excited about it. And it's really difficult to get a seed venture off the ground. So the notion is that these accelerators are going to take the best and brightest and translate them into fantastic entrepreneurs. And what's exciting is that academics are actually asking the same question that policymakers and business people are asking, which is, do these things really work? And so we have this amazing confluence where we're on the ball in terms of collecting the right data at the right time. And academics are actually asking a question that I think practitioners are pretty interested in as well. We rarely get that, I'm going to use the word synergy, Charlie, from strategy all at the same time. So let's think about this. What are the most interesting results that have come out of that group of papers? And we're going to post these on the website for people to take a look at. Charlie, what do you think in terms of the papers so far and the results coming out of them?
Well, there's lots we should talk about, but I think one of the big surprises early on, one of the most robust findings that several of these studies found, is that founders going through accelerators are quitting faster. So the first thing that they found is they're getting out of the venture more quickly. And I think going in, we know there may be economic reasons for that, but it still was a bit of a disappointment to people at first. Like, geez, is that it? We get faster failure.
Wait a minute, Charlie. No, so I just want to make sure I got this right. So if I'm going to try to set up an accelerator in my hometown, basically the pitch is going to be that I'm going to help people fail faster. I mean, it seems ridiculous, right? But I think that's what I find really exciting about these results. When we talk about accelerators, we think about Dropbox and Airbnb. And let's be honest, a lot of the outcomes, right, the big numbers associated with accelerators are concentrated among a couple firms that you've heard of. It's much like a venture capital portfolio in terms of hit rates. On the other hand, right, what we're finding out of these really carefully done papers is that, no, actually, accelerators can play this function not just of accelerating success, but also accelerating failure, which I think most entrepreneurs would tell you is a really important part of the process. But that begs the question, what are these accelerators really doing for the community or the local economy? Because I see places all around the world, Asia, Europe, the United States, Latin America, where they want to start these accelerators as a way to revitalize the local economy. And I wonder if we're just going to get mostly ventures that are just failing quicker, are we really selling a bill of goods in terms of economic development to these places that are setting up accelerators, or is there something else going on?
No, no. I think there's a lot going on. Though we should give credit to the fact that the opportunity cost of stumbling along with a not terribly successful venture for several years before you really determine whether this has great prospects or not, that actually has high personal and social costs for people. So deciding more quickly if your idea is really a go can have a lot of value and help people take the entrepreneurial risk and yet not give up their other career prospects and still be able to launch themselves into good jobs at companies. But let's also kind of go back to the research. These papers, and especially if we pull in Susan Cohen, Chris Bingham, Ben Howland. Susan's been studying this phenomenon since her dissertation at University of North Carolina. There's a variety of things that the papers are finding are actually working out better for companies that go through these. Both Cheryl and Sandy find that these founders also get acquired more quickly. So they create ventures, and these ventures are acquired by larger firms relatively quickly, and that probably has value as well. In addition, I guess I'll focus, Sandy doesn't find much of a difference in overall financing. In fact, if anything, Sandy finds that firms going through these get a bit less financing. But what Cheryl did in her paper, which I think is a bit interesting, she split it by timing. So these firms and accelerators go through this intensive 3 months working together and then a launch. And what she finds in terms of the next stage of investment, which tends to be venture capital follow-on investments, that immediately around this period of intensive training with the accelerator and a month and a half afterwards, these firms were more likely to get funding and quicker. But if you weren't, in a sense, one of the stars of your cohort, the accelerator, then for all periods after that, she found that you were actually less likely to get funding. So for the few standout firms within your class, these are a great avenue to more financing, the possibility of being acquired, and as a result, possibly more successful ventures. I guess we need to be a little careful about saying that. But if you're not one of the standouts of your cohort, then it's going to be a longer slog if you don't just shut it down.
Yeah, so Charlie, what I'm hearing about accelerators based on this research and also talking to a lot of people who've participated in these is it's sort of like a revelation mechanism, a quick way to reduce uncertainty. And sometimes, most times in entrepreneurship, we reveal the uncertainty in a direction that says, this venture really isn't worth doing. We should spend our time elsewhere. And I think you made a great point that, we shouldn't underestimate the amount of time somebody could waste on an idea that is not promising. They could reallocate their efforts somewhere else. I mean, think about the value of if we found a way to reduce the blind alleys that drug researchers go down investigating new therapeutic sort of interventions. If we could help them not go down those blind alleys, they could devote their effort to developing drugs and get to great successes quicker. It's sort of the same thing in entrepreneurship if we save people from working on ideas that aren't going anywhere. The second thing I hear from you is that timing and almost kind of the hierarchy within the classes really matter. And so another way to think about what happens in an accelerator, it helps separate the very best firms from the others. And that's really important too, because there's so much uncertainty at the beginning when it comes to entrepreneurship. So, I think that accelerators in general, this is what makes them so exciting. But I also think that the research design that the academics have brought here is really important because when I go out and I talk to people about accelerators in the real world, they often mention the big firms that you talked about earlier as success stories. But much like the Harvard admissions office that you mentioned, there's a selection process here that's really key. After all, firms that get selected into the accelerators could just be different or better than the firms that don't. And so what happens, I think, in these studies is they're trying to do the careful matching that you're talking about, either using the scores from the application process or finding a way to create matches with firms that plausibly could have been in the accelerators and really try to do an apples-to-apples comparison. And you see that in Juanita Gonzalez-Uribe and Michael Leatherby's paper on Startup Chile, one of the most internationally renowned examples of this phenomenon. And they find, really not much evidence of an overall treatment effect from the working paper that I'm reading, though some other sort of ancillary benefits from mentorship. And it'll be interesting to follow that work. One thing to think about, though, even if there isn't a treatment effect from accelerators, could just getting the name out, if you're a Startup Chile, about what the environment is in your country and what you're doing there to promote entrepreneurship innovation, could that be valuable in and of itself? What do you think, Charlie?
Yes, so there is one study in this set we're looking at. I believe it's by Hochman, and she looks at some of the effects on total regional investment in entrepreneurship, and does find some impact of if an accelerator is launched in your area, it does appear to increase the total amount of investment going to these new tech startups. So it made get people focused on it. Clearly, people are going to Santiago, Chile. It now has in order to participate in these, even from outside the country, and it now has a reputation as one of the hotspots for entrepreneurship and startups. And there's evidence that it's increasing the total investment devoted to these new ventures.
Yeah, so as we think about accelerators overall, I think dividing selection and treatment is really important. That's a contribution we can make. And then the different kinds of treatments are also kind of key to consider. It's on the firms that participate in the accelerator, but it also could be on the surrounding region. And I think that's the kind of effect that policymakers are going to be looking at as they consider starting and sponsoring these accelerators around the world. So, Charlie, to close out accelerators, it seems like this is going to be a very active area of research for the next few years, and there's a real opportunity to inform practice. And I think it's exactly the right place for academics to jump into.
Well, I do think that there's already this interesting pattern that these researchers are moving from these big questions, are accelerators accelerating? What's the treatment? To some of the details of the mechanisms by which accelerators affect those companies within them. So you mentioned the mentorship. There's already some evidence in some of these studies that the intensive mentoring really makes a difference. The cohorts that you go through with, both Susan Cohen and Cheryl Winston-Smith are starting to do some work to look at what's the mix of these cohorts and what kind of impact does it have on the firms, especially firms of different backgrounds? Does it matter if you get paired with a lot of other companies that are a lot like you? And then finally, the kind of networks that you build coming out of these. So I think pushing on those mechanisms and really understanding what should be the non-negotiable elements of successful accelerators will be very important for the next generation of research on this topic. I also think it's sort of interesting. I think we're going to get some generalizable insights into entrepreneurship, because this is almost like the fruit fly of our entrepreneurship research. You get to see a lot of firms going through in a public way very quickly the founding and growth process. I think we stand to learn a lot from this about entrepreneurship more broadly.
As we're nearing the end of our first podcast, I wanted to pivot, as almost all startups need to do, and accelerators or not, to our last segment, which we're going to call I Wonder. And we're going to end each episode this way, basically proposing in rapid fire one offbeat, funny, or just plain interesting research idea that literally just popped into our head. And all academics listening know that you have these all the time. All of you have them, but Charlie and I actually have a podcast, so you're going to get to hear about ours. Charlie, why don't you run first? Rapid fire, one I Wonder for today's edition.
Okay, well, so here's something I've been wondering about, which at least links in a distant fashion to our topic of accelerators. And it grows out of a recent trip to New York. One of my favorite things when I go back to the U.S. is to eat well, especially some of the divey little corner places that generally I've found out about from an old discussion board called Chowhounds. But when I was in Manhattan recently, I kind of struck out with it. I wasn't finding much there, and the website had really moved from, now it could be that Manhattan's become, especially around Wall Street, a bit more of a wasteland for eating than it used to be. But it's also true that this was a small, focused community of people who were really passionate about this kind of divey sort of chow, finding these sort of places. But the website really tried to grow beyond that, provide lots of sort of stylized information about food, create a broader community. And it just got me wondering about these sorts of businesses or organizational models that are based on a community. I think our early models are really based on scaling fast, get big fast, and certainly we see it with the advantages that Facebook got from getting big fast, Google and information, platform and community businesses. We've seen a lot of advantages of scale. But I wonder if we're going to see the next generation some interesting advantages or tensions coming out around the advantages of engagement, that if you really depend on a lot of decentralized people being very engaged to provide some of the information, attraction, drivers of its Ubers, So I'm very interested in sort of what's the value created per individual when these social community-based businesses or organizational models, how much value do you create when you get more engagement per individual? What's your total value created? And what's your adaptability? Can you move more easily or more quickly if you have a particularly engaged community, or does that tend to hold you back? So I would say this just line of thought is actually a little similar to the very early days of our field when Michael Porter came in at the dawn of strategy. He was reacting to the old get big fast, which came out of the learning curve studies that BCG, Boston Consulting Group, had been promoting, and pointed out, no, there's lots of valuable protected niches that are very profitable if you focus on them and do well in them. And I wonder if our early models of social media and community are bringing us too much to this big get big fast model. So that's something I've been wondering about this week.
Charlie, that's too good of an idea to waste on I Wonder. Now I was thinking about ideas that we would give away for free. And, actually, because of this podcast, people are going to start writing that paper right away. So you better get busy. I think that's super interesting. Mine's a little bit more fanciful. I've been thinking also on this topic of accelerators more generally and failure. One of the most interesting things that I've been wondering about is how we think about failure and the narratives that we create for ourselves about why organizations fail. When you talk to entrepreneurs, failed entrepreneurs, and there are many, about why the venture didn't work, you usually get a list of 2 to 3 reasons, having to do with product market fit, an inability to penetrate a particularly sort of opaque industry structure, or just execution challenges that kind of run the gamut from our team couldn't get along to the sales cycle was too long, things like this. And what strikes me is I could probably write down a list of 5 or 6 explanations that people give you in the real world for failure in organization. And what I've been wondering a lot is if these narratives, the thing where you ask someone, well, why didn't the merger work? And they say, well, the cultures were just too different. Whether that's actually describing the underlying causes of failure, or whether we just have shorthands to discuss failure, shorthands that could possibly be misleading. Because, for example, if mergers failed not because of culture clashes, but because of more kind of blocking and tackling execution issues, we might be missing some real opportunities to do better implementation. But because cognitively we can only really understand failure through a few dominant narratives, it might be holding us back from really reaching the next level in our organizations. And so one thing I've been thinking about and wondering about is, what's the language we use to talk about failure? Does the language really describe the underlying root causes? And if there is a mismatch there, how is it affecting the way organizations think about change? And that's been something I've been wondering about, and I'm giving away on this segment.
I think that's a really interesting one as well. Any one of us who's taught, especially practicing managers and executives in the classroom, find that resonates so powerfully with them. There's so much learning in a company that happens through failure, and yet if there's extraordinarily high punishment for it, then often companies can take advantage of the kinds of lessons that came out of past failures. Okay, so this brings us to the end of our first research chatter on accelerators. If you liked it and want to hear more, please subscribe in iTunes. Plus, pass it on. Tell your friends, your mom, your dog. Yell research chatter from the social media rooftops. Also, if you want to take out specific papers that we've mentioned, we'll link to them from the podcast post in our Facebook group. You can find us at the SMS Facebook group by searching Strategic Management Society in Facebook. And please comment there or write to us. Let us know what you think. Does your experience match the emerging research on accelerators, or have academics once again completely missed the point? You can reach us at our email or Twitter addresses. Ronnie's Twitter name is Aaron Chatterji, AaronChattergi. And his email, quite simple, is ronnie@duke.edu. Well, Charlie, my Twitter handle is a bit more complicated. It's pontificate. That's PONTIFIC 8 at the end. And my email is fcharleswilliams@gmail.com.
And don't forget to give us feedback on Twitter at strategic_MGMT. This is new. It's an experiment. And we're hoping you can tell us what you found most interesting and useful. Hopefully you don't recommend that we get a new host, because Charlie would be really upset if I had to do this alone. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.